So here we're going to take a look at the swatches panel, specifically how it relates to patterns. We're going to look at how to manipulate patterns that are already made and how to make them into your own through scaling and transforming and rotating them. So we'll get into first looking at the swatches panel. So if you don't have a swatches panel already up, you can go to Window, and then if you navigate down to swatches, it will pull up a menu that looks like this. Depending on how you opened your file, all of these may not pop up, but there's a way to get them back if they're not there. So we can go down to here, the swatch libraries menu. So you can also import your own swatches, but here we're going to take a look at some of the default ones that are already in Illustrator. So we can look for our default swatches here. If we go to default print, I believe that's what this is. But if we go down to patterns, we can look at basic graphics and then basic graphics lines. Obviously, you can open up dots and textures. And then there's also another tutorial below this that's going to go over how to make your own patterns. So make them totally from scratch. So you don't have to necessarily just use the basic graphics that they've made here. So the first thing that we're going to do is, so that's basically our swatches panel. So we can take a look at that. That's colors, textures, and then there's a whole bunch of other options in these other swatches. So the first thing that we're going to do is create an object here, and then we're going to take a look at actually filling that object in. So if we click over here and we click this big square, that's not the one with the outline, it's the one with the fill. We can also go over to, if we show our options here, so this is our color menu. We can also click the larger swatch, the larger fill there versus the stroke here. So if we click on one of these, it will automatically fill our object in with that pattern. The problem that's going to be with that pattern is it's going to be at a very specific scale. The lines are going to be at a specific color. They're going to be a certain width next to each other. So what we're going to look at doing here first is some simple transformations without actually getting into the actual pattern dialog. So if we go up to Object Transform, and then we go into Rotate, what we can do here is we can uncheck Transform Objects and we can check Transform Pattern. And then what that's going to allow us to do is manipulate the lines that this pattern is actually at. And if we have our preview off, it won't show that. But if we turn this preview on, it'll show what they become. So here we can look at, that's what our pattern becomes when we rotate the lines. We should also be able to go in here and do a scale. And again, we can scale our patterns. So let's say we want to scale that down by half, so we can change the actual scale of that pattern without changing the scale of the object. So if we don't want to do that and we want to apply our own our own pattern to this, so what we can do is we'll just delete that object and we're going to go through making a different object. If we go into our transform, we'll just rotate that back to 0. So we have those guys. So if we have that back to 0, what we can do is if we double click on one of the patterns that we now have in our swatches menu, so as soon as we make them active in here, they're going to pop up here as well. So what we can do is we can double click on this, and then if we double click on that, it will automatically bring us into our pattern options here. So you guys can mess a little bit with these, basically the type of tiling that it goes through, the width and the height and everything like that. Here, what we're really going to just get into is coloring of these and scaling of them. So if we take a look at, we can highlight, so the outside is basically just the larger swatch, and then this square registers where the pattern is coming from. So this is the base square that the pattern is based off of. So if we want to change the color, whoops, not the color of the fill, if we want to change the color of the stroke from black, we can change it to red. We can change sort of some of these to different colors than others. And then also in here, we can change the line weight of this. So instead, if we go to 1 point here, you'll see that we're going to start making pretty drastic changes to this pattern right away. And then it's going to carry out across the larger swatch. So then if we get out of that, we'll see that we've now made a custom swatch here that will actually register as this pattern. So if we didn't want to totally ruin what that pattern was first, what we would do is we would double click on this, it would go into the swatch, and then we can do save a copy, and then we'll just call it new pattern, that's fine. And you can see that it adds another one of the same exact pattern. And then when we go into the swatch editor, we'll get out of the swatch editor and we'll go into our new swatch. And then that will allow us to edit this without actually ruining the original swatch that we made. So you're not actually able to edit them in this menu, but you can go through, and once they're in your swatches panel up here, you can edit the look of these, and you can change the way the line weights work. You can change the rotation. So you could actually change rotation here. It's going to get a little bit complicated, so I wouldn't recommend necessarily doing the rotation in this menu. I would probably do that just as a transform afterwards. So if then you wanted this to be 45, what I would do again would I would go into object transform and then rotate. We can set that to 45, and then we would change our pattern to look like that. So rotating the actual pattern within that square starts to get a little bit more complicated, and you'll have to get into the other tutorial if you want to look more into that. But these are the basics behind patterns, behind swatches, and behind how to actually edit them once you have them in your file.